Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute for attendees to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're going to get started today. So thank you all for joining us. For those that don't know me, my name is Stephanie Gower, and I'm a principal at Santis Health, leading our government relations practice. And we all appreciated the feedback we received after our April 2022 pre-election webinar. And so that's why we're here today to discuss the renewed Ford government in Ontario and how health and life sciences organizations need to be creative with their asks and align their asks to government priorities. And so we have a lot to cover in the next hour. So let's get to it. I'm joined today by my colleagues across Canada. So joining us from Calgary today is Michael Chechi, and he's a public policy and regulatory affairs professional and supports the Santis GR team as an associate. Michael has a background in conservative politics, as well as has held corporate positions at TELUS and worked as an advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Ottawa. Hannah Casey leads our comms team with traditional communications and media support, social media strategies, and is an integral member of our crisis communications team supporting hospitals and long-term care operators across the country. Bradley Metlin is our newest team member, joining as a senior consultant on our comms team. Bradley joined Santis after serving in multiple senior level communications roles in the Government of Ontario as press secretary and director of communications for several Ontario cabinet ministers in the Ford government. And lastly, joining us from BC is Shay Alford, leading all of our digital services and supporting the marketing and communications team. Prior to joining Santis, Shay worked in the digital marketing and technology space for a variety of firms in both Ontario and BC. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. To submit your questions, please use the Q&A function at any time throughout the presentation, and I'll go through those at the end. The slides and a recording of our presentation today will be sent to you after the webinar via email. And if you don't mind, please take a minute to fill out the post-webinar survey, as it really does help inform our next webinars moving forward. So most of you on the line are familiar with Santis, but for those of you that are new, we are Canada's leading healthcare and life sciences consulting firm and focus our services in communications and stakeholder engagement, government relations, and strategy and management consulting. So today our presentation is really going to focus on communications and GR, especially integrated PR and GR campaigns, and really looking at tailored ways to advocate in this new landscape in Ontario with the PC government. So today on the agenda, we'll be covering the results of the Ontario general election, and getting a bit into what we can expect this term with the renewed PC government and the policy priorities. And then my comms colleagues will take us through sort of PR for GR and some integrated tactics and things your organizations can be looking at over the next several months. So now I'll pass things over to my colleague Michael, who will walk us through the election results and the new faces in the PC government and what this means for the new legislative session ahead.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and good morning, or good afternoon, everyone. The PCs, as you know, obviously won a massive second mandate. They went from 67 seats at the call of the election up to 83, which was larger than their first mandate, and really decimated both opposition parties, the Liberals still remaining without party status and the NDP with a reduced opposition seat count. Next slide, please. So regionally, some interesting trends happened this election. Has the PC party finally supplanted the NDP as the party of blue-collar workers. They made historic gains in areas of traditional NDP support, which include Northern Ontario, winning a seat in Thunder Bay and a seat in Timmins, I think for the first time in several generations. They made gains in the Hamilton area as well as gains in 2 of the 3 Windsor seats, which is just an astonishing accomplishment for the party. There was a historically low voter turnout of about 43% this time around. People were just not engaged or just not angry enough at the government to change things. And so, you know, I think it speaks to some general satisfaction amongst the population that the PCs were doing a reasonably good job. And this is the first time since, I believe, 1955 that the combined votes of the left and center left parties was less than 50%, which again speaks to a sea change in Ontario politics in some ways, with the PCs making inroads in traditional communities that have not supported them in the past. And some of that can largely be attributed to Doug Ford's own personal popularity, but a lot of work was done through Minister Monty McNaughton to make inroads into the labor community and such organizations that really pay dividends for this government. Next slide, please. So what does a renewed PC government mean? Next slide. So we had the cabinet announced at the end of June. The parliamentary assistants were also announced, a slightly larger cabinet with more parliamentary assistants. The chiefs of staff have all been confirmed as of last week. And now is the period where ministerial offices will begin to staff up. There's a lot of individuals that were working within this government that decided to take a leave from the government, you know, for other career opportunities or just to, you know, switch life trajectories at the end of the mandate, which is quite normal. But there will be some time for staffing up, especially with a lot of new faces around the cabinet table and with an expanded caucus, which means additional staff and just a bunch of hiring that needs to go on. The legislature will be recalled on August the 8th, and the speech from the throne will occur, and then a 5-week legislative session will begin. We expect that the budget, with, you know, perhaps some small tweaks, will be passed then, and are keeping our ears to the ground to see if any other legislation will be passed then as well. And then the legislature will resume at some point in late September or October for a fall session, and the government will continue as normal. Next slide, please. So we have a slide here that sort of indicates the ministers of relevance to the health file in Ontario. It's not just the Minister of Health, but there's a lot of other faces there. So of course, we have Minister Sylvia Jones that is now the Minister of Health and the new Deputy Premier, taking over from Minister Christine Elliott, who has left government. You may remember Minister Jones as leading the government's COVID vaccine rollout during the pandemic. And I feel like many people within government felt that she handled that file competently as part of her mandate as Solicitor General of Ontario. Also joining with a renewed mandate, but still staying in the same role as President of the Treasury Board, is Prabmeet Sarkaria. And he has an expanded mandate, which will include emergency services, as well as Service Ontario, which is sort of the central sourcing and procurement arm that recently the government created that new agency. And then we have Parm Gill, who's a new minister and the Minister of Red Tape Reduction. But everyone else that's not highlighted in red or with an asterisk remains in their roles, continues on. You know, we have Victor Fideli. I'll just highlight that he is behind the province's life sciences strategy. We have Monty McNaughton, who has been pushing for, you know, the federal government on additional immigration to get some workers into various sectors, including the health sector, as well as leading the portable benefits for gig workers, which includes sort of health and dental benefits as well. Next slide, please. So in the refreshed health ministry, we have Sylvia Jones, and Sylvia Jones used to be the Solicitor General in the first Ford government, as mentioned, but she also was the Minister of Tourism, Culture, and Sport. She was elected in 2007 in the Dufferin-Caledon riding, and formerly served as John Tory's executive assistant when he was briefly an MPP in that same riding. She has been the critic for community and social services and government services in the past, so has, I think, some understanding of how the government works, and has some experience in interfacing with the health sector, both due to her critic roles and her roles as leading the vaccine rollout. Dr. Catherine Zahn remains for now as the Deputy Minister of Health, though the Deputy Minister files are fluid, and we may not have seen yet the full settling out of that. But for now, she remains as the Deputy Minister of Health. We have, working with Sylvia Jones, Honorable Michael Tibollo, who beat Stephen Del Duca in the riding of Vaughan-Woodbridge and is serving as the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. And then we have two parliamentary assistants reporting to Minister Sylvia Jones, or assisting her rather. Don Gallagher Murphy, who's a new MPP in Newmarket Aurora, who served as Christine Elliott's constituency assistant. And so she has, by virtue of that, some understanding of the files and should hit the ground running in that role. And Robin Martin, who continues in her capacity formerly as Christine Elliott's parliamentary assistant, will continue on in that capacity and continue to work with the Ministry of Health. We have a new Chief of Staff reporting to Minister Jones and leading her office in VJ. Heather Watt, who was Minister Elliott's Chief of Staff for the last 4 years, has decided to leave government. And Vijay has been an accomplished Chief of Staff. He's been Chief of Staff to Ministers Smith and a long time PC insider. I believe also worked in the Harris-Eves government for a time as well. And then we have Suzanne Dennison, who will be the Chief of Staff to Michael Tibollo in this new mandate. Next slide, please. So the staffing shuffle, and I highlighted it a bit earlier, but right now we've seen already there's some deputy minister shuffles within either moving in and out of roles, retirements, or moving from ministry to ministry. So, you know, we will of course let you know when that's all settled if it's not already done so. But the point I wanted to make is that there are major changes underway in the staffing ranks within ministers' offices. There has been a lot of turnover in this government, I would say more so than what a normal government would be at this point in their mandate. So there will be a lot of opportunities to get in front of new people, new policy advisors, new stakeholder relationship people, and really make a case for some of the issues that are most important to you. You know, don't assume that anyone in a ministerial office is a subject matter expert. That's just not the case. And so, you know, there's going to be a period of building new relationships and really being able to work with this government. Next slide, please. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Stephanie.
Thanks, Michael. So some of you will remember this slide from our April pre-election webinar, and I thought it was a great place to start today, just to see how things have changed or not changed over the last few months and post-election. The data on the screen is from Abacus and shows the top priorities for Ontarians, which again, I don't think have changed much. I think we've just seen likely a solidified sort of top three priorities: reducing the cost of living, the pocketbook issues that the PCs went into the campaign with, cost of living, housing, affordability, and third issue is improving the health system. I know it's an incredibly sort of broad category, but still top issue for Ontarians. And it will be interesting to sort of see how these issues remain or change in sort of you know, the public opinion polling as we enter this seventh wave of COVID. Flu in the fall, and I think many stakeholders are concerned sort of with the state of the health system right now, and we'll get into sort of the major priorities, but I just thought that this was a good place to start as a reminder from the April and June election. Next slide, please. So Our presentation is so timely today with the premiers all in BC for the Council of Federation meetings, and the issues, I know there's a lot on this page, but they really showcase the sort of significant pain points I think that a lot of provinces are experiencing right now post-pandemic, but also the sort of incredible need for an increase in CHTs from 22 to 35%, which is what the premiers are asking for. In Ontario specifically, the issues on the screen that are marked with an asterisk are areas of focus that our team has, in the last few weeks had conversations with the political staff. And so these will be areas of focus for Minister Jones and sort of key policy priorities for the ministry to focus on. So public health, are we looking at sort of the modernization piece that started in 2019 pre-pandemic? What are the learnings from the pandemic and sort of what can be done from if it's an amalgamation perspective of public health units or what else? I think we'll see that starting, that discussion starting in the fall. Again, COVID surge preparing for the fall, that's not going away, that remains in place. The one note though, in terms of the minister's office, the director of pandemic response, Kevin Lass, is no longer in that position. So the minister's office will be looking to fill that role, especially as we sort of navigate the next 6 months of the COVID wave. HHR, massive issue across the country. We heard just yesterday from Premier Ford, with the sort of immigration agreement up for renewal this fall, he's looking to renegotiate a bit more control, number of workers, types of skill sets, fast tracking approvals to work in Ontario, and just making up for the massive sort of unfulfilled jobs in Ontario, healthcare being a top priority in that. We're also seeing a ton in the media right now on primary care, family physician shortage, which has only just progressed through the pandemic and just gotten worse. And ultimately, is leading to significant issues in emergency rooms, urgent care centers, all of that. Surgical backlog, top priority again, of course, directly tied into HHR. I think there's a bit of a difference in sort of opinion between Ontario Health folks and the ministry folks. So it'll be really interesting to see sort of how the minister tackles this as a top priority. And we have a note on here as well. What's the role of external providers and public-private partnerships? Are we looking at something like that? I think one of the main issues we thought we dealt with during the first wave of the pandemic was the supply chain issues, but substantial supply chain issues are still a major issue for a lot of medtech companies. And now, how is inflation impacting the cost of these products? The new role of under a Treasury board with Supply Ontario, are we looking at more of a centralized model such as Alberta? It will be very interesting to see what PrabMeat Sarkaria does with this portfolio now, under the Treasury board and not MGCS. Michael highlighted life sciences strategy. It's a collaborative effort. I think we'll see more on that, late summer, early fall from economic development. And of course, home and community care, sort of modernization, it's a very large system, has been a focal point for the government in the last, I would say, year and a half, 2 years. So what's next on this? Are we looking at sort of streamlining, consolidation? How does it fit with the Ontario Health Teams model? And we're at over, I think, 40 OHTs covering the province now, and the government really sees that as the delivery, OHTs as the delivery conduit for services. So I think, OHTs aren't going anywhere. We'll see a doubling down on that. There's a lot happening for the new minister to tackle. And we just tried to summarize that on this page here. The next slide is really just what was tabled in the April 2022 budget. So at the time, health accounted for just over 37% of the total budget. But we expect, and we're hearing that there's a significant acknowledgement of inflation. Construction and labor costs are increasing. We're hearing 30 to 40% on major infrastructure projects. So the ministry folks have been working on sort of tackling these new costs. And so I think there will be a substantial change in the budget. I don't think the sort of major investment and policy priorities will change. It's just the actual cost. So the 40 billion over 10 years for health infrastructure, I think we can expect to see that tweaked in the budget when it's tabled in August. The only significant investment that wasn't in the budget that was a campaign promise that needs to be included is the increase for ODSP. Next slide, please. So what's next? The legislature, as Michael said, is resuming 5-week sitting on August 8th. Before the speech from the throne, which I expect will outline high-level priorities of the government, similar tone and focus from the budget speech, and likely even more recognition of inflationary costs, affordability issues, all of the same messaging we heard during the campaign. But a really interesting development was prior to the cabinet announcements, Nina Tangri, the former Minister of Red Tape Reduction, announced her intention to run for Speaker and be the first, I believe, first female Speaker in the legislature. So that election will take place. There's been a bit of media attention around the opposition party's support on this. It sounds like it's a move that the Premier's office is supportive of, so that will change the legislature dynamics a little bit. Obviously the budget bill, which we just went through, and 5 weeks is a long time to sit just to pass one budget bill. So what else is coming out? Other priorities that may not be healthcare related priorities that the government is looking to pass some new legislation. And a big question is obviously mandate letters. I haven't heard any indication if these will become public, likely not. But having a bit of a sense of sort of those top policy priority areas that I just took you through, I think will be all included in the mandate letters for sure. Next slide, please. So the PCs really have the benefit of a distracted opposition as well, with a massive majority and a distracted opposition as both parties are in search of their new leaders. So there have been a few NDP leader candidate names floating around already, Catherine Fife and Joel Harden and others. So we'll be looking to see what sort of shape that leadership takes with Peter Tabens as the interim leader, and potential Liberal leadership candidates as well. A few names from outside of provincial politics, and Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, Mary Margaret McMahon, and others looking to sort of take the reins of the Ontario Liberal Party. So that'll be interesting to watch, and will allow the PCs to really push through with their focused mandate. So I'm going to turn things over now to my communications colleagues to talk a little bit about PR for GR and some integrated comms tactics.
Thanks, Steph, and good afternoon, everyone. So just as Steph said, we're going to shift gears and talk about communication. So how do you ensure that, the issues, the priorities, the recommendations that are very much top of mind for your organization also ultimately end up on government's radars? So at this point in time, there's a few tactics that you should likely have either, underway or at least starting to think about. The first, of course, being congratulatory letters sent to relevant ministers and MPPs if your organization is focused on, some key ridings or jurisdictions, and use that congratulatory letter as an introduction to your organization. You should also be thinking about meeting requests, most likely for the fall session. As Michael pointed out, there's going to be lots of staffing throughout the summer, so it might make the most sense to hold on to your meeting requests and offers until the fall, when those offices are fully staffed and resourced, unless, of course, your issue or there's a priority that needs to get in front of government sort of ASAP in that August sitting period. Well, you would also want to have either a slide deck, a one-pager, a briefing note, some sort of document that outlines the problem or issue that your organization is facing, your sector, your members, whatever the case may be, and your recommended solutions to address that issue. When it comes to framing your recommendations or your asks, there's also a few things that you should keep in mind. First of all is trying to position those asks as best as possible to align with the government's priorities that were outlined both throughout the campaign and in the April budget. In addition to that, we know that the government sort of positions themselves as action-oriented and builders. So try and think about how to frame your asks in sort of an easy to digest, easy to understand win for sort of everyday people. And on top of that, obviously we're coming out of 2 years of unprecedented healthcare spending. So tying, a budget number or a price tag to your ask might not, be the best approach. And instead, it's important to think about, finding ways to support government and finding efficiencies or cost savings. These examples here are really just sort of the baseline of what your organization should be working on. As Steph pointed out, there is a shift in direction and a shift in priorities from the government. So to get in front of decision makers, you really do need to be creative, which is why an integrated PR and GR approach is so important, and why our two teams at Santis do work so closely with each other. So on this next slide, it's just a bit of an overview between the difference between a PR approach, who your audience is, what tools you're going to use, what the messaging may be, and how that differs from the GR approach. But ultimately, like I said, the two need to work in collaboration and hand in hand, because the goal ultimately is to set the stage for your conversations with government, to build a groundswell of support and a chorus of awareness. There's tons of different words we could use to describe it. Ultimately, so when you do go to government, you can pinpoint that other people are talking about your issues and your recommendations as well. So you can show sort of the breadth and depth of the impact it has across the health system. Sometimes your PR campaign might come before GR. So before you even think about engaging with elected officials, you might run a social media campaign. So when you do go to government, you can say, X thousand Canadians or Ontarians are also talking about this issue. On the flip side, you might do the GR engagement first, and you've done the meetings, you've done follow-ups, you've done outreach, and you're just not seeing the progress you'd like. So it might be worth sort of stepping out of your organization's sort of comfort zone, its usual sort of traditional government relations tactics, and turn to social media or digital or earned media to bring further awareness to your issue. And ultimately, measured escalation, I think, is the word that we use in order to bring issues sort of broader in scope. In any scenario, whether it's PR and GR or GR, then PR, or a mix of both, it's really important to monitor what announcements are coming, the results of your outputs, other conversations that are happening out in the public space, and ultimately scale up or scale down depending on evaluation of those results. I'm going to turn to my colleagues to walk through the next few slides that have very tactical examples of tools that our team uses quite frequently to integrate this PR and GR approach, but ultimately just some headlines here to leave you with of just a few examples throughout the government's last mandate where they ultimately sort of shifted direction or implemented a policy because an issue did sort of end up in the public discourse and public realm. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bradley to chat about media relations to start.
Thanks, Hannah. So while we certainly know more people are getting their news online and via social media, we also know that they turn to trusted media outlets to do it. They're not just going to a random blog, they're going to CTV News, National Post online. So that's why media relations is so important when you want to push a message out. But something to keep in mind is a report out of Reuters and Oxford University last month found 71% of Canadians say they actively avoid the news at times, whether because it's exhausting, there's too much negativity in the news, they're not paying attention all the time. So what does that mean for you? Well, when you're pitching a news story, an op-ed, or a coverage of an event, you should be asking yourself, would the average Joe care about this? Because that's the question editors will be asking themselves in the newsroom when they consider your pitch. So in order to isolate against that and figure out kind of what the most effective way to position your story is, you have to get the public to care about that. And how do you do that? It's a little tough, but there's some strategies. One of them is thought leadership. So the best way I can sum this up is When someone's running for president of the United States, they usually put out a book with their grandiose vision for America. So, Kamala Harris has The Truth We Hold, An American Journey, or Pete Buttigieg has Shortest Way Home, One Mayor's Challenge and a Model for America's Future. Now, I'm not saying you have to write a book. That's not necessarily what thought leadership is, but this is on a large scale. In your case, you need to show you can offer a solution to a problem in your sector, or offer a novel set of ideas, a new way of looking at things. Now, this just can't be a regurgitated press release. It has to be something new. It has to be something engaging. A few months ago, there was an op-ed in the Toronto Star about how we use e-health and everything is available at the touch of an app. But it asked the question, what about people who don't have access to internet regularly or don't have access to apps? It's a new way of looking at an issue that, we don't always consider. And that's why it was be newsworthy. And that's why somebody was likely to publish that. And then to that way, another way to engage is by highlighting the people behind the issue. There's an old saying, people won't remember what you said or what you did. They'll remember how you made them feel. And healthcare is full of stories that make people feel hope, sadness, inspiration. Why not tell them? We have an opportunity to do that. So on the next slide, you'll see, in addition to getting in the media, there are other tools you can use to bolster PR efforts. And heck, they might even get you media attention as well. So that's good. So I know I just told you that personal stories can make a huge difference, but sometimes a shocking statistic can really make an impact. So earlier this month, QP released a poll that said 63% of their workers in hospital had experienced physical abuse. It's shocking, it's horrible. People go to the hospital to get better, but staff are facing abuse. That polling point makes that point so stark and effective. Without it, that issue is not illustrated as effectively. So sometimes a polling number can really make a world of difference. Then of course, there's the report. We know there's many different types. There's financial, year-end, case studies, etc. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, is somebody gonna really read through 60, 80, 100 pages of a report? The answer is probably not most people, but if the report is interesting and has something unique to say, someone just might summarize the findings, whether it's a journalist, whether it's someone on social media. And let me tell you, as someone who worked in the Ford government, news that an Auditor General's report was coming caused consternation. Staffers were running to prepare talking points and preemptively arranging meetings with stakeholders. It may have been a big financial report that was dozens of pages long, but the top line information sold a story. And that's ultimately sometimes the most important thing, is selling a story. And as we know, one of the best ways to tell stories is in person, in events. Luckily, things with the pandemic seem to have settled into a new normal. And we're hearing that in-person receptions and lobby days are going to be back at Queen's Park. This is the quintessential example of PR and GR mixing together. And do not underestimate the importance of throwing a good event. Again, as someone who worked in the government, you could text anyone in a minister's office and they could tell you which organization catered in the best food. They'd have a definitive answer. It's almost like if you go to someone's house and they microwaved you dinner versus someone who spent hours cooking you dinner. You're probably going to tell your friends about the person who cooked you dinner. So it seems trivial, I know, but people do remember hospitality. And beyond that, of course, there's events that also have the ability to capture news attention. So maybe there's a really special speaker who's going to be at an event and they're noteworthy. That could also hit the news. So that's also something to keep in mind. It's a great segue to talk about influencers too. The bottom line is this: a lot of people are going to be more popular than politicians. If a notable person can speak to an issue that you care about, they're likely going to have more resonance than someone talking about it at Queen's Park. So I remember in the first year of the Ford government, Minister Lisa McLeod wrote an op-ed and she compared the Ford government's policies to that of former NDP Premier and father of Medicare, Tommy Douglas. So Kiefer Sutherland from the TV shows 24 and Designated Survivor, also happened to be Tommy Douglas's grandson, tweeted about how this comparison was dead wrong, how it was not accurate at all. It became pretty clear after that hit the media that you can't argue A, with someone's grandson, and B, with a television star. So I'm not suggesting you need to go out there and find a celebrity that cares about your issue to move the needle. If you do know a celebrity, that would be fantastic in terms of getting engagement. But sometimes it's just as simple as picking a spokesperson who's comfortable talking in front of the media for someone who might be more knowledgeable but gets pretty nervous. So those are just some things to consider. The great thing is Santis has led all these different tactics for clients over the years. And so we can help get that going as well. And so I'll turn things over to Shay, and he'll talk more about other great PR tactics.
Thank you, Bradley. Yeah, just some more tools that you can kind of put in your tool belt here. When you're thinking of the world of digital media, you might just think about social media, but we do know these days there's a ton more areas and platforms where you can really make sure your voice is being heard and really expand your reach, no matter what tactic you're kind of going for. And we've kind of discussed a lot today, so you can kind of imagine how all these things come together. So there's three kind of main pillars of digital, and when we think about digital media marketing, and I think a strong digital centric plan really does consist of a nice harmony between all three of these areas. So it really starts with a nice integrated paid and organic social media plan. So that's your traditional social media posting, but layering in some paid posts and promoted posts that really are going to boost the engagement and start building your audience. From there, you can start expanding beyond your circle and beyond social media to reach new audiences. And that's on areas, like news sites, billboards, even TV commercials. People still buy those, and you'd be shocked at how well those can perform. And finally, where are you leading people? Where are you displaying information, and how's your advocacy being heard? That's a landing page. So that's either, a site on your website, or maybe a brand new website that's created just for one campaign. Really thinking about all three of these things is what's going to make that strong plan. And then, of course, you need to bring it all to life somehow. And that's with creative design and copywriting. So, the team here at Santis, we do this all the time. And we can help you every step of the way. And with creative, it's very important to, have that be consistent. So what you're seeing on social media should really look a lot like what's going on that landing page. So on the next slide, we're talking a little bit here about some tactics. So, social media, really what we kind of see being as the most effective areas to kind of advertise on is Twitter and LinkedIn, mostly because with healthcare, Facebook has a ton of regulations that makes it very tough to advertise. So, we typically tend to stick with Twitter and LinkedIn, and we do find great results there. So when you're looking at your audience on social media, the great thing with paid social is you can actually target, health system leaders, key networks of, certain companies, or government officials and people that work in government. You can also have the option to go broad, really raise awareness in, certain areas or regions. The nice thing about social as well, totally flexible with your budget. So Twitter, we know, is one of the lowest cost platforms to advertise on, but that goes hand in hand with having less control over who's seeing your content. LinkedIn is actually the most expensive platform on all of social media, but then again, it's also the most targeted. So lots of things to kind of consider when you're planning your budget. With all social media and really all digital, you can kind of get creative. So, look at videos, look at using multiple images. There's tons of options to kind of get, more creative and really boost your ads. Thinking about the rest of, the web space, news sites are actually a very efficient way to get your message seen. So, you can go regional, you can target just regional news sites and different media outlets. And you can also layer in other things like thinking about keywords and specific articles that you might want your messaging being seen on. A great way to amplify that message as well is thinking about using animated creative. So for the same price as buying one static ad, you can buy a GIF style ad. Shows multiple frames of content. The next slide. So going beyond their phones. So you can also utilize out-of-home ads. And billboards, when you think about it, you might be thinking, okay, that's a little bit traditional, but you'd be shocked. Digital billboards are, not only are they a great price, but they're also super effective when layering into your campaign. So with out-of-home, things like that, bus stop that's shown right here on this image, you could actually target people that have walked by and been exposed to your ad at the time that it was playing on their phones. So you can think about how important that could be, with your digital, tactics. You can target areas like Queen's Park, make sure you retarget them when they get home, and really make sure your message is being seen at all times. And obviously there's a lot more layers you can throw in there, but it's pretty neat. So we always think about that when we're planning our digital campaigns. And finally, the next slide. Tracking your impact. So of course, the most important thing you can do with all your digital efforts is really keep track of all the analytics, all the data, all the statistics, thinking about things like media reach, your social media analytics, even people that are just liking your posts. All this stuff is super important. And the reason why is because this is what's demonstrating, how your organization has or could offer solutions for the government's priorities. So think about that as, building public awareness and then being able to prove how many people have actually, engaged with this or, have seen your content. All of this is proof points that you can use when you're meeting with elected officials. So that's kind of just a little highlighted digital space. Obviously, there's a lot more to talk about there, but I'll pass it back, I think, to Stephanie.
Thanks, Shay. So just to summarize, next slide, please. Organizations really should be, and we're working on this with a lot of our clients right now, but doing a refresh of sort of policy priorities to ensure that they resonate with the PC's mandate focus. And as Hannah mentioned, I think we've seen such a high and unprecedented level of spending and investments in the last 3 years, really, in healthcare. That won't remain throughout this entire mandate. So how do your policy priorities fit with that? Finding cost-effective and efficient, asks to take into government that support sort of the broader system is really important. There are a lot of new faces, as Michael said, in the PC caucus. Spend the next 3 to 4 months really building up those relationships, meeting with the new MPPs and parliamentary assistants. Use creative tactics as outlined by my colleagues to keep momentum on your issues. Media, digital campaigns are a great way to keep the pressure on urgent issues. And lastly, to inform our clients, Santis is going to be launching a quarterly healthcare polling on top health issues such as HHR and staffing, home care, pharmacare, and other sort of urgent and top priorities. We'll be launching that later this summer, so stay tuned for more information on that in your inbox in the coming weeks. So with that, we already have a few questions coming in. So I'll remind everybody you can use the Q&A function to ask us any questions. So I think I'll start with the first one. The first one is, in your opinion, will there likely be changes to the budget, or is it more likely to have minor tweaks? I think that the biggest tweak, that we'll see is the ODSP, being added. But in terms of sort of the inflationary impacts on all of the infrastructure projects, it is going to change the number, and sort of I think we'll see a lot more when it comes out in line by line and allocations. But I'm not expecting any sort of massive policy priority shift or anything like that. Michael, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
Oh, I think you covered it. That's great.
And the next question we have is in terms of policy areas for health PAs and who's responsible for what. Has the portfolio been split between the two PAs yet? We haven't heard sort of anything on this yet. I think a lot is still being, transition is still occurring. The minister is still being briefed on everything. I was looking in on a file for a client, and transition binders hadn't even been provided on that subject matter yet. So give it some time. We'll keep everyone posted, with how the portfolio is being split between the two PAs. You have Robin Martin in the role for some last 4 years with a lot of experience on the files. So it'll be interesting to see how they divide it, but no, the portfolio split hasn't been public yet. Where is adoption of biosimilar switch policy in the new government's healthcare priorities? I think I don't want to steal my colleague's thunder on this, but I think there will be more to come on this in the fall. Again, hoping to see mandate letters. I'm hearing some rumblings that this might be, a priority for the fall. But again, a lot depends on sort of where are we with the pandemic and what happens in the fall. And if that consumes attention again, it's really difficult to move some of these big files through. Let me see here. Why would government move emergency services under Minister Proudmeat versus leaving? Right. So, I think Treasury Board, first of all, Proudmeat Sarkaria, and Michael, please jump in here, but Proudmeat Sarkaria really is a strong leader around the cabinet and caucus table. That's an incredibly important region that the PCs now dominate the entire Brampton region and won some considerable ridings there as well. So I think providing him with an expanded mandate and moving emergency services, which were under Solicitor General before. He was also leading sort of the legislation prior to the election in April on sort of the pandemic preparedness. So it will be interesting. The deputy minister that was under Solicitor General's office for emergency management has moved under TBS, so there's some continuity there. It is a very good question, Deborah, in terms of, I think they're elevating it in terms of a priority area by giving it to Prabmeet. And as well with Supply Ontario, like there are massive sort of changes, I think, in modernization and centralization. They're seeing that as a massive priority and opportunity to tackle by putting it and entrusting Prabmeet with all of that as well. Michael, you can take this question. A lot of staff have been leaving and high turnover in terms of, I guess, political staff. Do you want to take that?
Sure. Well, I think there's a few reasons for it. Certainly in the first year of the government's mandate in 2018, it was a very tumultuous time. If you recall, Premier Ford's then Chief of Staff, Dean French, I think it was sort of well known that he caused many problems within the offices and really forced a lot of what I would say competent people out of the government within that first year before he himself was asked to leave the government. So that sort of caused a cascading effect where those people had already left and found other careers, new people came in, and just the way that the GR world is going, there's been much more focus on across all levels of government, all provinces, on sort of lobbying, government relations, and engagement. So, it's gotten a much more sophisticated industry, and I think a lot of these firms have been poaching staff. The government hours can be crushing, can be brutal. Like some people within the Minister of Health's office were regularly working 7 days a week, 12, 14, 16-hour days. So I think for that reason, there would be some higher turnover, but there is a bit of a labor crunch in the market in Ontario, across Canada today. And I think for a lot of people in these offices, you can really get a lot of experience very quickly, and so certainly the private sector has been part of that issue as well. And just I guess based on sort of the fiscal restraint of this government and during the pandemic, sometimes the public sector ministerial salaries are not competitive, and so others might choose to leave for that reason as well.
I think there's a few other questions on here. Any speculation, Michael, I don't know if you want to take this, on the changes to Deputy Minister for Ministry of Health?
No, I think we're, we'll have to wait and see. But right now, that's sort of, you will know as soon as we know if we have any intelligence to share with Santis clients. But we'll have to wait and see on that.
And one last question on here: federal and provincial relationship at this time with new election results in Ontario. I mean, I can start on this, and Michael and Bradley, happy for you to jump in too. I don't think that there's, much change or much difference from the province's perspective. Priorities have stayed the same. Relationships, I think the Premier has fantastic relationships with the federal government, and often comments on his friendship with the Deputy Prime Minister and really moving policy files along and important issues for Ontarians along. I think that sort of the sort of rollout and the way that the federal government, it just seems that we're on the path towards almost a pre-election push from the federal government right now. And there's a lot of sort of campaigning happening. So it'll be really interesting to see sort of what the change in the dynamic is, if the feds are looking at another election in the fall or early in January in the new year. But yeah, I mean, I think the relationship is fairly status quo right now. Michael, Bradley, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Well, I would say certainly for the I guess the first year and a half before COVID, the relationship between the Ford government and the feds was fairly bad. COVID has really made them work well together, and it's a bit counterintuitive just knowing how different they are on so many styles and ways, but they've managed to work collaboratively, and we'll see if that continues now that I guess the focus for the government will be on sort of moving forward. COVID is not going to be the top issue of the day for the government going forward, and so we'll see if that causes friction or if they continue to work well together.
One thing I would just quickly add to is in 4 years, Premier Ford has gone from being one of the newest premiers around the table, Council of Federation, to being one of the most senior. And when you consider the right-leaning premiers across the country, he's kind of the natural voice, being from the largest province. I think only Scott Moe has been around that table in Saskatchewan longer. So one thing we could look to is seeing if, Doug Ford kind of asserts himself in those relationships with the premiers and the federal government a bit more, or if he continues to let kind of other premiers take on that role a bit more.
Great. So there's a few more questions coming in. I think there's two that are fairly similar, and Michael and Bradley, your insights on these as well. Paul Calandra's role as Minister of Long-Term Care, along with his responsibilities for, government house leader, legislative affairs, all of that stuff. Sort of one question is, one would think that the LTC ministry needs a dedicated minister to really focus on LTC transformation. And another comment on that is just asking in terms of why did they keep it separate and not bring it back under the health umbrella? So I don't know if Bradley, if you want to take that, or Michael.
Yeah, so I can probably speak just to Paul Calandra continuing to have those two roles. I think in terms of government house leader / minister of legislative affairs, whatever you want to call it, I think it's rather, I mean, they sit at the cabinet table, but they don't have a huge portfolio in terms of day-to-day work. When the legislature is sitting, obviously they have that maneuvering, but in terms of, they don't have one policy file that they're overseeing. And so I think this is two things happening. Them acknowledging that government house leader, somebody could have something additionally on their plate. And then second, it's a show of confidence in Minister Calandra as well. It's a clear sign that he has handled himself very well, that he's very competent. I remember in the first term, Robert Benzie at the Toronto Star said he has a unique ability to cool the temperature at Queen's Park, and has good relationships throughout the legislature. So that might be a reason they kept him in the government house leader portfolio, but I don't think it is a heavy workload.
And to that point, there's also a separate and distinct ministerial sort of staffers that would deal with the two different files. So it's not like there's sort of staff that are working on both. He has sort of distinct staff, distinct command and control structures in each of those two ministries that assist in that.
So this is a fun question that I know you guys will love to answer, but any speculation on mandate letters and if they'll be public this time?
I don't think they will be public. The Ford government has spent years in court fighting to keep them private and confidential. So, I mean, unless the Supreme Court has something to say about it, I don't think they will just volunteer this information. Something that's interesting to note about mandate letters is they weren't always made public. I think this is a rather recent phenomenon. I think Kathleen Wynne made hers public and Justin Trudeau made his public. But I think otherwise, I don't see a lot of premiers or former prime ministers having done this. I think it's fairly easy to glean what a minister's priorities are based on what they're doing in public, what they're saying. I don't think there's a lot of hidden stuff in the mandate letters. As someone who's worked in government, I don't think they're hiding away policy files from the public. I think they want to take credit for what they're doing most of the time. So it's frankly, if I'm being honest, it is a little bizarre that they haven't been more forthright and just released them and have spent all this effort fighting it in court. But I think they are going to continue to keep them private unless they're compelled to do so legally.
Okay, and one last question. There was an incredible political push during the election, and a lot of discussion around for-profit versus non-profit in long-term care in the election platforms from the other parties. Do you foresee any of this having an impact on other files? Any thoughts of where this, if this continues, if this momentum continues? I mean, I can sort of start this discussion, Bradley, and if you have thoughts on this and want to jump in. But I mean, I think, a lot of it was in the political platform documents from the other parties. I'm not really foreseeing any movement on this from the Ford government to make such a substantial change. It was not any, in the budget, any discussion in that. It was just from the opposition parties. So I'm really not seeing, any space for that to occur in LTC specifically. I think if anything, for other operators, whether it's home care or community care, that kind of thing, it's more about the sort of overall sector and potential consolidation there. I don't think it's a for-profit versus non-profit discussion that we'll be seeing from the government. But Bradley, I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that.
No, you summed it up perfectly.
Okay, fantastic. So I think that's all we have time for today. We really appreciate everyone attending. And again, the deck and recording will be shared via email. And we would really appreciate it if you can fill out the post-webinar survey. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks everyone for joining.